of this, and I think the other in the next presentation.
Hello, greetings. We are pleased to have Lluis Ortega here today with us. You got his full bio in the email, but I will just pick out a couple of highlights about Luis, who is an architect, a researcher, and educator. He studied in Spain. He studied at Columbia, and he has a diploma in philosophy at the University of Barcelona and a PhD from Madrid, right? Barcelona, sir. And he teaches currently, he's an assistant professor at UIC and a visiting professor at the Universidad Torquato di Tella in Buenos Aires. Did I do okay? So previously he's taught in Barcelona, in Vienna, and the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. He has co-founded F451 Arquitectura. You would have to tell us why that very strange name, but maybe in conversation later. That has been rebranded as CO2 Arc, even more complicated, in 2014, and it has been received international awards and has been exhibited collaborative practices he's had with Santiago Ibarra, Xavier Lozarte, and Esther Segura. Among his many skills and talents, he has been the editor of several specialized publications. He was the director of Quaderns d'Arquitectura y Urbanisme for 2 years, 203 and 205. He worked as editor of 2G magazine, number 14, and on the co-edition of Jose Vina's writings in 202, as well as Platform GST 2008. He published the reader La Digitalización Toma en Mano. The translation is the digitalization of the hand.
No, takes command.
Takes command, after Gideon, and was adjunct curator of the main designer of the Spanish Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale of 2014. To you, the stage, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me to present my work here. I'm just gonna basically go through a set of projects that I've been developing in many different scenarios during the last years that will a little bit reveal part of the bio that Michelangelo has just introduced. So, but also, I hope that will also like unfold two of the main premises that create some sort of umbrella to all my work. Those are like two very simple, almost like evidences, but sometimes are difficult to perceive in some cases of the work from other practices, is that I deeply understand architecture as a kind of a cultural practice. That's one of the main drivers of my own activity. And the second one, that I truly think that contemporary architectural practice basically is a collaborative kind of activity. And I will develop what does it mean collaborative in the sense of what kind of impact this condition has in different projects. I'm just gonna explain a set of ideas through many projects. So I'm gonna go through slides. So I'm gonna stop in some projects to highlight certain aspects, but it will be interesting that maybe we open a conversation about also like basically the development of certain arguments through the work. This is like a not fully updated map of my life and my work. As has been introduced, I have like a polytechnic background from Barcelona, which involves basically like a multidisciplinary kind of training in architecture, but also with a lot of strong foundations in urban design and landscape and history and theory. After graduating in Barcelona, I got a scholarship to go to New York, which opened a little bit a different perspective in my practice, because I was fully immersed into more like an Anglo-Saxon tradition of education and discussion. And then through like a short period of working or extending this kind of like post-graduation program in London working, I went back to Barcelona to start my office. That office was basically already inaugurated or called F451, and it was based with 5 partners. F451 was a moment of extremely like exhilarating kind of belief that paper was gone. I was involved into the kind of the paperless studio in Colombia with all the explosion of the digital And it was a sort of a provocation in Barcelona as a way of importing certain kind of discussion into the discipline. But also, it was also like an internal joke that never, I mean, it was the least commercial name that you can have because nobody can spell it. I mean, it was impossible to. So that we got stuck to the name, but then immediately after that, I got a position of teaching in Vienna. I moved there. And that started another of the characteristics of my practice that has been always kind of a global activity where I'm being abroad, and there is a kind of like a practice in Barcelona, and we've been working from the distance, opening different kind of possibilities of scenarios and different collaborations. So as the kind of timeline progressed, the network has been growing, but it has also been densified through the different kind of academic projects that I've been involved in Vienna. Then I went back to Barcelona because I won this magazine that I will explain slightly after, and then I moved to Boston to be teaching there at Harvard for 3 years. I went back to Barcelona again, and then for the last 4 years I've been in Chicago, hopefully to be more stable. So this kind of back and forth, I mean, I think that it's important to also explain this idea of understanding architecture as a kind of a global phenomenon, but that also has reinforced my perception that to be really like operative, you really need to understand the local conditions and be very careful how do you calibrate the tension between the two kind of logics. The last thing of this short introduction I wanted to highlight is that I understand my practice, and that's where the name of the lecture comes from, as a kind of a multi-platform kind of structure where I basically have 3 kind of tracks of work. One will be like more the office work, the other one is more academic research, and the other one is more about editing. And I will go through those kind of tracks, trying to see how certain topics bridge from one to another one, and how the different mediums feed back on each other. So let's start a little bit with practice. Now we are called CO2. This was a name that came in with the financial crisis in Spain. Basically, we had to reset our company like a few years ago, 2-3 years ago. It was a tremendous clash from every perspective, and that forced us or helped us to think or rethink a little bit what our company should be about. And we expanded, or we thought that practice should not rely only or mainly in the kind of work that we were doing up to that moment. That was mainly public work through competitions, but we had to really like integrate much more explicitly the idea of research in architecture as a cultural practice that has a much more broad sense of activity and interaction with reality and the world. So I'm going to go through like 4 families of projects that will hopefully highlight a little bit how do we embrace our architectural kind of activity in the office. I mean, some of them are built, some of them are unbuilt. For example, this first family deals with what we call like expanding types, or basically like most of them are like houses, and how do we think or drag certain kind of know-how that is being developed through the different projects from one to another. That's why I call it architecture within architecture, or like a meta-architecture, in the sense that basically the type is always expanded with questions that were originated in a previous project. I'm going to just show like a couple of them. This is one project we developed, non-build project for Ordos. That was a project led by Ai Weiwei and Jacques Herzog. They invited 100 young practices to make a proposal for Ordos, Mongolia, and China. And then the project in this case was like a house, a very large house, and the site was basically for us like a dual site. It was like a disciplinary site in the sense that we were surrounded by 100 architects, and the planning was like basically like a distribution of houses, and that we imagined that more like a zoo where each one will bring their own anxiety into the project. And the other one was the problem of the house itself, and within a particular conditions of environment, but also construction techniques and cultural and political and economical means of that project. What does it mean for them? So basically, we proposed like a highly introverted house where we explore the limits of basically creating your own site, and we play with this kind of like topographical changes, and we work with a multidisciplinary kind of team. That's also like that is something very regular in our practice. Also like from it's not only consultancy, but we try to bring together like teams that are like engaging the conversation from the very beginning, and they are from all over. In this case, we're working with an engineer, AKT office from London, and then an artist and a landscape architect from Mexico that basically we worked together into the whole proposal. So that was also, I mean, and the project was in China, and we were based in Barcelona. So I mean, that mess of like global practice for a single house was basically creating the conditions of discussion and how we have to systematize certain kind of conversation through the game. We were like, of course, having the cultural agency of the project, but also the technical deployment of that. I mean, so the environmental conditions were difficult, and also the local technology, we'll have to develop the project with the local institutes from China, and how can we just like embrace the know-how from the place and the possibilities of certain construction techniques to deploy a proposal. So this second project is part of this family, is a house that's been built in Mallorca, in Esporles. It's one of the islands between Barcelona and Valencia in the Mediterranean Sea. And it's some sort of like an extraction of a piece of the, this is not very clear, it's like, extraction of the Ordos house, in the sense that it's creating its own site within this site. Of course, it's much more extroverted because of the climate and so on. But I mean, it has this ambition of creating like an indoor space that is outside. And this has this kind of three-dimensional section that quotes very literally, of course, Lina Zubardi's house that is now exhibited in the Graham. And this is the site and the kind of the construction as it is now. So you see here from above, this kind of like a construction of your own site with a house. And then you have this three-dimensional patio that drops down and sort out the kind of the topographical change on the side. You can see here the difference between the different kind of the envelope, how it falls within itself. And you have this kind of large kind of windows that could be open to expand as much as possible this kind of separation between interior and exterior. There are some kind of like construction technique issues that, again, we drag from project to project as a kind of a know-how that is being developed in the office, and you will see in other projects how we tend to use like prefabricated systems that are assembled on site. And this is, I think it's the last project of this part. Oh no, there's another one. It's another house. This one was built, finished recently in the north of Spain, in Gijón, in Asturias. Was nominated for the Mies Prize. We didn't get it. And in this case, the type is expanded through the collision of programs. It's a kind of a domestic program, but it's also like an atelier for a painter. Plus, again, all those projects that I'm showing in this kind of first kind of cluster of projects, they deal very much with a roof condition. No? Like, I mean, so they expand the ground within an architectural apparatus, and then you have this kind of like a typological hybrid. You have the kind of domestic, the painter, and the landscape that come together into a single place, and then articulates its differences through means of negotiation of the different formal and space qualities. So you see here much more the part of the house, the part of the atelier, where they share certain kind of like extended material means, but they have their own special qualities, and they have these kind of areas of exchange between the two, where you see one from to the other. This is the atelier area, where you see this more like industrial roof that is building the landscape of top, and then when you see the indoor of the house, you extend the system, and it vary in a completely different relationship towards the ground. So those are like spaces of the house. And this is the last project I want to show about. This first question about the expanded type is a house that is under construction now in Menorca, one of the other islands in front of, between Barcelona and Valencia. And this one is an existing site that has a topographical change in front of the sea, of the Mediterranean Sea. And then you expanded the ground into a very articulated roof that basically builds a kind of an artificial landscape where the architecture in a way basically brings some sort of geometrical stiffness to the landscape that makes it artificial, and then the landscape softens a little bit the interiors. So here you see some images of how this thing is looking more or less now, and how the interior becomes softened through the geometry of that structure. Now I'm going to shift to the second big topic that we engage this what we call expanding urbanities, and this more deal with like larger projects, mostly like public housing projects, with shifting of volumes as a main strategy towards qualification or articulating. This is a kind of a slide that again I cannot see very well here. This is a project. So basically, this was an existing pathway. This is in Barcelona, and we inserted a block that we break into in order to allow a new street to happen within the block. So those are images of the site. This is a proposal, and the idea was basically to optimize the volume that was asked, that was very tight with a super low budget, to increase these kind of new urban spaces that were like allowing to expand certain level of urbanity in the project. With this, I just want to shift to the last two topics of the office. One is what I call expanding technologies. Is more architectural systems, and those projects are basically projects that are extremely constrained because of the type, and the kind of the public authorities provide like a very strict definition of what they want, and they are very modular in general. So there is a kind of an effort of intensifying the role of the envelope within the qualification of the projects. So I'm going to show only two. This one is a daycare that we built north from Barcelona for elderly people, and we have this basically like very simple kind of volumetrical distribution of the requested program that we could not challenge at any level. And then we invested a lot of energy and a lot of tests in the construction of this envelope that could qualify the relations of the different interiors, but also we create some sort of identity and character to the proposal. So it's a very simple solution with a kind of a ceramic piece that through its deployment generates very different conditions from environmental to privacy, degrees, and different gradients. So this is a building as it is. I mean, of course, building in Spain is difficult sometimes, but management of architecture in Spain has become almost impossible. This building was built and it was 2 years without being open because they couldn't pay for the kind of the personnel that was supposed to manage it. So all the pictures are as it was when finished, and now I will go back because it seems that it's running and I would like to see how it works and how it's lit. The project basically is, again, what I was mentioning, is a very simple distribution of very normative spaces with this kind of very differentiated envelope with a single ceramic piece. I mean, that a few variations, but basically try to create this kind of extremely rich differentiation of experiences and environments. There was a lot of effort of hybridizing or bringing a landscape into the architectural palette that we were using to qualify those spaces. So you see here how we were hybridizing envelope or facade structures with green, and we were building those kind of secondary structures to allow the green to happen, or this more like a green roof that we'll see here. I mean, the use of the brick allowed us also to engage very much the kind of the industrial context of the site, which is a very large industrial, almost like end of 19th century kind of complex that has been now reused for cultural purposes. You see here also the use of prefabricated elements, so that's why the technology comes in. I mean, we've been investing out of research in prefab systems that could be assembled on site, fast, easy, and guaranteeing certain kind of quality, which is sometimes in these kind of projects is difficult to handle because of many kind of logistic issues, like quality of the personnel that is working, budget constraints, and so on. So those are spaces of this daycare. This is kind of exterior roof. You see here that within the kind of very difficult context of the site. And then this is a view from the top roof. Thank you very much. From the top roof, where you see this green, new green carpet that we also like to think that is going to be appreciated by the neighbor, and then all this kind of lower level of ceramics that could engage in a very literal way the materiality of the historic site that is nearby. Some pictures of, I was sent a picture recently of how the green is popping out. I mean, this was originally how it was, and now it's growing more. And this is the second project of the envelope question, where we deployed this similar strategy into a more radical proposal in the sense of prefabrication. It's a project for a temporary extension of a university in Barcelona, and we were asked to do like a building that was supposed to be there for 10 years maximum, for like seminar rooms and auditorium and a little bit of offices. And we were supposed to be like respecting this piece, that is a tunnel that connects an old building with the campus here. So this is the site. It's a historic site. It's a very nice building here. It's an old water facility that has become the library of the university. And on the other side there is a general campus. So our building was supposed to grow here only for 10 years, and we were supposed to building in a very fast mode in order not to interfere with the campus life, but also within a very kind of tricky situation on the urban level because we couldn't have a strong impact while the construction was going on. So we built the whole building out off-site in the north of Spain with a company that was supposed to, used to do like boat construction ships and then has transformed into kind of like building construction now. We chopped the building, we put it into trucks, and we assembled on site. And then what we did was basically to clad it with a polycarbonate envelope that could basically dissolve the modularity of the structure, but also creates a kind of light perception of the building within like this historic site, and with a very like little like moves of the volume we could respect certain kind of existing conditions, but create also these correlations between the different programs, and also like respond to the urban kind of like intertwines and negotiations that we have to go through. And so this building is still there. I think it's going to stay there forever until it collapses, because basically the ambition of having it for 10 years in Spain now, everything is there, is going to stay there as long as they can. So I don't know, because it was not designed to be staying there for forever, but it's still there. So 2 years after that, we were asked to do all the kind of the area that is surrounding it to stabilize the operation a little bit. So with this question, I would like to start the last topic of this part of the presentation, which is what I call expanded sites. And those are projects that are basically based on the construction of grounds, mostly. This is the site of the extension that I was showing before, and this was the site for the kind of the green area that we're supposed to build for the social gathering of the students. So you cannot see here. Okay. Basically, we developed this piece that is a prefabricated system that is a prototype that now is you can buy it for using for other places. It was supposed to basically be able to engage, and is doing that, retaining small, like different heights in the terrain, but also like creating benches and tables for social gathering for the students. And this is a second project that we were doing at the same time, where we were developing a very different kind of project, but with a similar logic in the background, that is using like almost like this prefabricated or like off-site pieces to organize like a clear geometry on a ground that could help to re-qualify the site. This is like a very little garden in the north from Barcelona, and the owners, it was a couple that couldn't basically get an agreement of if they wanted a pool or not. So it was like an endless discussion, and basically the husband didn't want a pool, and the wife wanted a pool. And it was an old pool there, was destroyed, and some kind of topographical changes and so on. So basically, after, we thought that they were going to get divorced, and because of the project and so on, it was a very tiny project. So at the end, what we convinced them is to do something that is not one or the other, but it's a site that basically during the winter is empty, and it's built so their kind of grandsons and so on can play. So it's a garden. And then during the summer, they just put some water. So it's not really a pool, but they can play with water. And they got an agreement. We did it. And we did this kind of like prefab pieces that are fiberglass off-site as a way of reorganizing the topography, but also to keep some of the existing little trees that were there that were super important for the husband that didn't want the pool, wanted the garden. So we did that, we built it, we put these kind of fiberglass pieces. There was a huge storm, and 80% of the trees of the garden were gone. So the discussion was out of the question if we have to keep the trees. But still the pieces were helpful to organize the different kind of materials and qualifications of this very little site. the last project that I'm going to show about grounds is a non-build project. That was one of the projects we lost with the crisis clash. We won a competition for like a large international ferry terminal in Menorca. And basically it's a site that is dealing with all the logistics of the port and then all the landscape. We developed it for 3 years and you don't see anything here. It's a big, basically it's a plan of all the logistics that we had to go through, like working with engineers, landscape, environmentalists. And it's a very technical kind of like deployment that goes very close to civil engineering because there's a lot of constraints coming from the kind of the loading and unloading scenario. There's a huge parking space that is all this area and so on. So this kind of layer of technicalities had to deal with like a very strong landscape that is reaching that area. So what we decided is to develop some sort of prototype that was able to handle the kind of the ecological systems from the site and the kind of the engineering constraints from the program. So I mean, it's not very nice. I mean, in the screen looks very nice. Anyway, this is like this idea of like creating continuities between site and program that you've seen in previous different projects with a different scale, of course, and how the roof was becoming an artificial ground in itself that basically was allowing the people to engage more public programs of the ferry terminal here and then integrate with the existing historic fabric of the city on the other side of the bay. So with this, I would like to shift a little bit to projects that are more like, if those are like what I could be called even now, applied research or something like this, these are more like pure research. Those are like two projects that I want to show that have been developed in the context of the Venice Biennale. I mean, this is a 2002 project for the Venice Biennale where we were like asked by the ministry to do together with a more senior architect, Alejandro Zaera, to develop like an installation. And we did expanded the team to something that went beyond the architectural kind of realm, and we partnered with mathematicians and computer engineers to explore the limits of the discussion against the digital in that moment. This is 2002, where we were basically producing like a content we could discuss the problem of subjectivity and taste within highly digital predetermined context. So this is like an opening question that I dragged through these last 10 years, and that was basically finalized or one step forward with my PhD dissertation 2 years ago. The second project that I wanted to show today from that type is research that was developed for the last Biennale in 2014, where Iñaki Avalos, who was in charge of the Spanish pavilion, asked me to be the adjunct curator and the designer of the exhibition. So we developed a whole research about responding to Rem Koolhaas' question about modernity. I mean, just simplifying the question, I'm sure you are very familiar with it, for the certain kind of historical period. So we decided to do like a research that was focused on only one aspect of the Spanish architecture, this is the interior. That was like I mean, we cannot now go very much into details, but there still was an argument about that is one of the characteristics that basically differentiates very much Spanish architecture versus other more Northern European architectures in that period. So what we did was like a survey, a historical survey of Spanish architecture. We did some sort of taxonomy, and we highlighted 12 contemporary projects that were basically surrounded by historical material as a way of like opening the discussion about that particular topic. And then the exhibition design, this Spanish pavilion is a very interiorized pavilion. So basically what we developed and I wanted to do is like a system that could basically expand the capacities of the pavilion by creating its own interiors, and at the same time producing an experience for the user that could be open but highly determined by the qualification of the project we wanted to talk about. So we did these 12 projects with large images, and we created this kind of like lateral relationship between them. And we did like this system that was folded planes, very simple, that were supposed to basically print one photograph of the interior, and create its own interior by itself. So we gave this kind of, we were working with a photographer, Jose Villa, which is a photographer that we've been working with for the magazine as well, and he was asked to go to those places, those projects, with that in mind. So he was taking the pictures basically constrained or with a particular vision of what the photograph will do for you. So this is the layout of the exhibition, and these are the images that were distorted in certain areas in order to be restitute as super large effects from certain particular points in the rooms. And this is the kind of the tripod information we're providing. It's a large picture of the interior, one very large section, and then all the historic material around it. It's a very simple exhibition that was documenting 12 projects. Of course, the opening, the fun part, and then that is also super important in respect to the kind of cultural ambition of our practice, is that we always want to think that our projects are not only like a related to its own kind of like deployment, but also like that they create a new condition for discussing architecture within different kind of among peers, but also with society. This is a second iteration of the same exhibition. So that system that was developed as a prototype was tested in Madrid. Now it's still open, the exhibition, and we were given like a very long subway station that is not used. It's in a ministry. So we were using the folded planes, but in a different condition, where we're building these little, almost like butterfly shapes. And the challenge here was that the space is very narrow and very, very long. So we couldn't, in a way, reestablish the conditions of like lateral visions between the projects. They were encapsulated by themselves. So for compensating that, we cluttered the space with mirrors, and we provide a much more visual relationship between the different interiors that we were in Venice created by space. In this one was created through visual kind of like relationships. So those are images of the same material, the historical photographs, the large sections, and one photograph, and with the same kind of fold condition, but displaying a very different kind of site. And then the last outcome of this research was like two books. One is the catalog in itself, that is an archive with all the historic material we've been researching, and two large essays, one by Iñaki Arroyo and one by José Luis Pardo, and then a newspaper that was going to be given away during the event, during the whole Biennale Barcelona in Madrid, with essays by myself and other people discussing more the correlation between the content and the design. So now I just gonna start this kind of second platform that is not so much based on the office, but it's much based on editing activities. So there are like two tracks that I want to highlight in this platform. One, it will be editing through careful observation of reality, or the now, and how this observation is not like a passive one, but it's an active one in the sense that it's always ambitioning to create a question and to basically feedback on the reality in itself. So the first experience was Quaderns. Quaderns is a magazine that is run through a competition system. It's the official magazine of the Colegio de Arquitectos in Catalonia. And I won the competition in 2003 to run it for 2 years. So they give you like 2 years contract and you just have to resolve the project. So we set up a new format for the magazine, and we launched a program for 2 years development. And we were doing basically, I'm going to explain now a bit more in detail. We launched the magazine as a new magazine, which it was not true in a way, but basically it was a way of like resetting and engaging the audience in a very active way, because we were interested in to get as many information as possible, but also to really like open this new conversation. And we set up like a strategy of publication where the commission from the institution was, how can we just build up a magazine that help us Catalan architecture to be better known outside? And I thought that that was like a completely understandable demand, but also like it was not interesting only as a kind of a PR kind of operation. It was much more about opportunity for saying, okay, the best way of engaging Catalan architecture is to make it in dialogue with globalized questions and globalized practices. So basically in each of the issues, we were like collecting all the local information we could get from practitioners. Like we're having a huge network of antennas that were providing us the clues of what was going on. We didn't provide like a overall kind of thematized issue, but basically we were analyzing what was there, and then from that we were distilling a topic, and then we were like bringing that content with exterior material that was not Catalan, but was not only sort of for architects. We were like engaging artists, of course, like international architecture, non-architects self-built material, historic references. We were like doing like commentaries and criticism that basically was building this kind of like discussion and platform of development of arguments that could feedback the Catalan architecture at the same time that it was basically putting it into like a global context. And we were also like asking like well-known architects to provide us their kind of favorite books, like Alvaro Sisa was there, and others, like just giving them what do you like to read. So it was a way of like expanding the cultural ambition of the magazine that in some periods was driven much more by a purely like a portrait kind of tendency. And then we did something that was new for the magazine. We launched 2 projects, one each of the years. One was like an international competition. So it was an idea that the magazine is not only about looking at what is there, but also it was about like changing what is there. So we were asked what is the competition is going to be about, and we said, okay, it's going to be about housing. And there was a moment where the bubble was extremely strong in Spain. We were like building more than the whole Europe together. So our way of engaging that was, okay, now we're going to do a competition of how do we build 400,000 more. So a way of like highlighting the problem of like this kind of like super rapid growth. We're giving them like 3 very local sites, and then we were getting this income of know-how from all over the world to discuss those. So we launched a competition for the question, and then we launched an exhibition for the question, and then we did like this exhibition for the results as a way of like creating some sort of particular discussion about a local problem that was engaged by international community. Of course, the jury was also international, so it was a way of also like helping us, but also like projecting the question into a global scenario of know-how and discussion. And then the outcome was one of the issues of the magazine. I just brought a copy here if you want to look at it afterwards, but basically where we edit all the proposals, all the winners and so on, commentaries from the jury. So it was this idea of competition, not so much about giving a prize, but basically creating a particular kind of table where we could articulate the problem from a different perspective. And the second event was another of the big topics that I was and still very much engaged with, that is the education of the architect. No? So Barcelona has a strong architectural kind of culture, and the school has gone through different periods. So we basically thought that it was a good moment to really rethink what does it mean to educate an architect. So we did like a conference. We invited a large panel, like Boigos was the key opener, but there were like experts of education from all over. Was Iñaki Ábalos, and like you know the faces there. And then we also did like an open call for new educators to provide their kind of like input into the discussion. And then from that we did another of the issues of the magazine, where we basically like synthesizing, but also like disseminating that kind of discussion into a larger context. It was a multimedia publication that I also have here. So. Okay, within that context, at the same time, we were asked to do like a research, and that has been like a 2-year research where I was part of a larger team, so I was not directing this one, but basically it was about architecture without place. Basically, architecture was never built. So that was an interesting like research, because we were able to go through archiving historic material, but at the same time understanding what were the political and the cultural constituencies of each of the kind of the periods in Catalan architecture, and then we did this exhibition and the catalog as well. So the other part of my editing activity has been about working with other practices. I mean, as you mentioned in the bio, I was working for 2G, and I was publishing the first monography of foreign office architects, and then I was also working for another publisher where I was doing this kind of writing compilation, which is at Inas, who is a local architect that has a strong influence in Spain. Both of them were like offices that I was working when I was a student, so it was a way of revisiting them with a different perspective. And the last one I've done of this type of work is the book that just came out from Iñaki Ábalos, where Iñaki Ábalos asked me to help the office or the practice to understand or articulate better a very open research that he's been engaged in the last years about thermodynamics and architecture. So we're like basically part of the editing discussion about how to articulate something that sometimes are not, or post-rationalized things that sometimes are not predetermined so much. They are coming in forms of vague intuitions, and then by re-articulating allows the kind of the field to think better which are the new opportunities. And shifting now into more academic work, this is a project that while being at GSD, I was asked by Mohsen Mustafavi. He was coming as a new dean, and he asked me to think or to invent a project that was not in the school, that could allow them to have a more cohesive understanding of what was going on in a school that, as you know, is very large, has 3 departments: urban design, landscape architecture. And so he asked me, okay, Lluis, why don't you just think about like a publishing project that could help us not only to synthesize the project, but also to just expand what could happen next. So we did this project that is like a prototype of our collection, where the content was not based so much in departments, but much more about like topics that could be identified through the work that has been produced during that year. So it's a project that collects all the information from that year and then builds up like a book for the following year where all this thing is rethought. And it seems that has been like an interesting platform for them, because since I left, they've done 7 more with the same template. And this is, you don't see that, I can skip this. Basically, those were samples of more internal publications that I normally do. Those are like research. One I started at GSD at Harvard about new forms of urban ecology, and this one is more about like the impact of digital regime within technology that I've been developing at UIC as well. So those are more like internal publications that I do with the students as a way of more or less doing the same process, no? Like just opening a question, producing certain kind of material, but then by the role of the editing is becoming a way of redesigning the question, so we're feeding back on the original premises. The last 2 publications I wanted to highlight are of a different kind. They are not so much about observing reality as it is, but it's much more about identifying topics or like tracks of speculation. One is the one that I was mentioning at the very beginning about the impact of the digital within architecture. That has been like a very long process of research. In the meanwhile, I've been doing like installations, as I showed before, but also like I did like a reader for a Spanish publishing house where I was compiling certain parts of the kind of the digital writings, or the writings about the digital, and translated that to Spanish, when they were never translated before. And then I did, 2 years ago, I presented my dissertation where I was taking my stand, and this is a book that is, I'm working on now and will be published next year by Acta Publishers. So it's been like a long period, like 12-year process that, and now it is in the kind of the publishing moment, but still need some months. The last project I want to show is the one that I've been developing at UIC for the last 2 years. That was a research studio that was, we call it Super Rural, and it was directed by me at UIC, and I partnered with Ciro Nagle in Universidad Torcuato Di Tella in Buenos Aires. So we opened a question about similarities and differences in the 2 regions that are kind of parallel, like Midwest and La Pampa, where they share very much many things, from some sort of like production logics, but also like technologies. John Deere is the one that's exporting the patents down, and but at the same time they have strong differences as well, like the highly regimented regime of the United States versus the more laissez-faire, a bit chaotic part of Argentinian mood. Creates interesting kind of similarities and differences. So basically this is a project that we did a survey of existing technologies, but existing formal organizations within the rural context in both places with 2 groups of students. And then we were building some sort of catalog, almost like a new Neufer or like architectural standards of the rural world. And then we were like speculating with that for new types of possible like urbanizing logics. That's why we, instead of like, it was a way of like compensating, instead of being suburban, to be super rural in a way. So that was like a 1 year of research with seminars, studios, and so on. We did all the compilation of information and so on. And then this last year we've been expanding that research with like a photographic work that we just got a grant from Graham to do the research, where a photographer went to just survey the two territories according to the systems that we've been looking at as a way of getting like a photographical register of that. And at the same time, we've been asking like philosophers and landscape architects and other fellows to feedback on the project, and we've been editing those texts and they're going to be part of the book. So this is like this kind of like understanding of architecture, more like this idea that is almost about building on questions, but those questions should be extremely kind of focused, but also like targeted in order to provide feedback on the original premises that allow us to generate certain know-how, but at the same time the importance of the dissemination of that knowledge as a way of getting like kind of a global discussion of certain topics that we think that are relevant. This book will be launched in September. It's now in press in China, I think. So I haven't seen it yet. I have seen only the draft. So. And I think that I'm going to stop here. I'm sorry for the rush. I wanted to show many things. I hope that we have time for questions or any doubts that you may have. Thank you very much.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, well, I guess since it's an interest of mine, I wonder if you could talk a little more about the dissertation or the long-term research on the digital.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, in this format, it goes by pretty quickly. But,
Sure. As you can imagine, it's like a very large topic, and one of the challenges that is always changing. No? I mean, like it has been like a whole kind of navigation through the theme for many years. I will basically synthesize that basically the book that I'm working on now is not so much another book on the digital as a way of claiming the digital as a new territory on which to develop, or as a kind of a breaking point in the discipline, but it's much more challenging the kind of the cliches of the digital and trying to figure out which are the differences and the continuities with the history. I'll just give you one sample. For example, the research that I was doing at USC about the impact of the digital and technology, we were basically looking at pre-digital projects and digital projects that could share an architectural question, and then, or an architectural agenda, if you want to call it like this, is very evident, very explicitly. And then we were redrawing those kind of projects under that perspective in a very systematic way, as a way of highlighting which was the impact of the digital regime into the project of the contemporary project. So that was allowing us to discuss it from many perspectives. One was purely about the production possibilities of the digital condition, but also like the new aesthetics categories and so on, but also was also like highlighting the continuities of architectural questions that were more expanded through the digital, not so much basically creating a tabula rasa. So that was one of the kind of articulations. The other one is more like philosophical, if you want, or more like theoretical, is that I deeply think that the real impact on the digital is a linguistic one, in the sense that basically is more related to the turn than not so much a revolution or change of paradigm, in the sense that it's creating a whole new set of meta language from which we can talk about architecture in a different way, or that basically highlights certain aspects of architecture that basically were commanded by other kind of models, like the more mechanical logic. And that kind of like context of continuities and differences is the one that is driving the approach to digital. So in a way, it started by a certain discomfort among the two very kind of dichotomic positions against the digital. One is like claiming that it's a new paradigm based on the digital and so on, and the other one is saying that the digital is purely instrumental and has no real impact on architecture. So it's always okay, creating a new path on which you challenge the kind of the topics or the cliches of the digital, but at the same time, by doing that, you provide some sort of new context of discussion about architecture in those terms.
Like where do you position it compared to Mario's
Carpo's? I mean, yeah, Mario Carpo was basically, discussing this the notion of the print and the continuity. I mean, like for me, the difference will be that is much more in the territory of what I call the game, the role of the new digital, in the sense that basically for me it's providing new rules or new conditions for playing architectural games. I think Mario Carpo is more interested into the actual technological kind of notion of the digital in terms of linguistic conditions, in terms of linguistic, architectural linguistics. I'm thinking more about computational thinking. So this is slightly different. I think that's more, it's very similar. I mean, the sense that, it's starting from Mario Carpo's kind of intuition, but it's going, I think, deeper into more computational thinking. In the sense that I think I'm more interested in cybernetics, and he's more interested into expressions. But we could discuss that with him. Actually, he would not agree in my reading of his work.
But if you discuss linguistics, right, or post-structuralist linguistics, it is then probably or could be related to your very opening statement on architecture as a cultural discipline, right? Sure. Because it is a creation of the new language.
No, sure.
And you've been, somehow participating in paperless studios, yes. Hani Rashid, Greg Lynn, Stan Allen, and then Carpo comes with his, and then Bernard Cash comes yes. with his discourse. So it's fascinating. And we somehow went through different takes on it. Mm-hmm. But my question goes really back, is it a question of observation, goes back to really how you would then not define, but talk more, maybe with a little bit more of the evidence, what do you mean by culture today, which we cannot look at the culture anymore as an opera and a symphony orchestra, and kind of traditional forms of culture. And what you've been presenting through your work looks to me like a radical questioning of the established types and the established languages and the creation of the new languages. And to what extent this cultural endeavor or a cultural possibility of architecture would be in a relation to the market, to the advancing market.
Sure.
And then I just go back for a second, one sentence with the masterclass we organized at Berlache with Saskia Sassen. Will was there as well, with Rumor and Abel Cohen, who was at that time the mayor of the city of Amsterdam, where she put in front very interesting argument. She said, if we take digitalization and the globalization serious, then we have to understand that we would have a possibility of creation of alternative spaces and counter spaces, which she would then argue would be only possible within the digital regimes. And that was a fascinating, invitation to architects, because she goes into the spatial issue, how it is possible in that, new global economic sphere to create alternative projects, counter projects, she called them. What would be your would you give up on that belief, which she partly did in the last book, that neoliberal capitalism would not really allow us to really perform these counter projects? Because what I see you are showing is a counter project, is a project challenging the canon, challenging the predominant economic and social conditions.
It's an extremely open question, so I don't know if I'm going to answer what you expect in terms of focus. But one thing is the question about the digital. The digital, as I was trying to say before, one of the things that I was shocked is about the oversimplification of digital. For example, the name of the digitalization text command, of course, comes from Gideon, and actually it starts in 68, and it's the same year, 68, where Gideon died. There was the exhibition of Serendipity in London. So it's the same year that I take as a kind of a turning moment is the 68. So, of course there is a kind of an ambition and illusion towards change, radical change and so on. So I'm not giving up, that's a kind of a biographical need, but I'm basically interested at the digital and one particular aspect of it, because there are many aspects. I'm not so much interested into the digital as an illusion towards optimization, for example, and I'm not interested into the digital as a mean of reinforcing the expression of the romantic architect as such. I'm interested in the digital as a way of creating a new kind of structure of thinking that allow us to be more robust and to engage more complex cultural, political, economical situations. So I mean, that's kind of the way of approaching it. That's why I'm more interested in cybernetics than so much into the problem of the expression of production. But of course, it has many different kind of lateralities and possibilities, no? I mean, and there is a lot of internal possibilities for the digital, from the disciplinary point of view, as a kind of a design skill kind of platform. And also, like, it has a strong impact in what I think is pedagogical interest. Like, for example, there is a kind of a turnout where the production is much more integrated within the kind of the pedagogies, and that's something that has been a turn versus other models which I've been engaged very much about the kind of the prefabricated outside and so on. So I mean, there is a kind of turn that could affect things that are extremely cultural from the point of view, for example, changing the way that we teach students or changing the way that we talk about architecture. But there is a whole other territory that is about basically more related to purely like economically driven kind of projects that, of course, all the big data and all this more like urban design strategies, which I think that are very challenging, very difficult, extremely difficult to to empower architectonically. But of course, I think we have to engage them from this ambition.
I would like to, in addition to these questions which were raised so far in your presentation, I would be interested in, let's say, the local. In that sense, you spoke about Venice Biennale, you spoke about what happened in Spain. You made the shift to what you did and you're doing at UAC. We have the annual in Chicago at this very moment. You are involved in that.
Yes.
The position of students, schools, IIT, Crown Hall, which brings me to the momentum that I believe strongly that there are these momenta and these momentas where there is a great momentum for Chicago at this very moment. And I would like you to elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure.
So what is the possibility of Chicago community, Chicago professional profession, and the possibility for the student? Could you say something in that context?
Yeah, I mean, like, I share your optimism about Chicago. That's partially why I'm here also. But I think that optimism, that kind of latent energy has to be activated and shared through all the agents that are in the city. And I think that's something that I've been trying to do since I'm here. So, and I've been doing that always with the involvement of students. That's one of the main roles that I can envision to have is basically, for example, last year, I was doing this seminar at UAC where I was opening a question about how architecture becomes public. And how, it's not only about like just like projecting architecture, but also like how do we really change the perception of the value and the possibility of architecture within the kind of the urban context, but also the kind of the political value and the cultural value of it. So the discussion of the seminar was basically, I invited Sarah Herda to co-teach it because I knew that she was basically directing the new biennial in Chicago, but also because we are friends, we know that we can work from the institutional point of view in many different projects, but then I also expanded that seminar to other agencies that I think that creates a very strong link. For example, we were like inviting people from CCA, Albert Farreg, who was former editor from Actar, was taking part on that seminar. And I was also like inviting like people from Actar publishers to come to discuss the possibilities of the city and those kind of possibilities into that seminar. And I was also like engaging the people that were doing the Biennale in that moment in Venice to part of it. And all of them were extremely confident that Chicago was an extremely fruitful territory at the moment. So that discussion was, of course, unfolded under very different perspectives. Some of them were much more about discussing like the power of the new kind of like project that came to the city lately, like UIC, your project here of Nowness, and of course the new biennial, the importance of the institutions like Graham Foundation, but also the kind of the affinities of this kind of also like strong tradition and history of architecture. I mean, nobody, when I just here in Chicago and I go outside, and I come and say, what do you mean Chicago? So I'm an architect. Ah, of course. Because there's no more natural situation in the States, I think, that has more commitment to architecture than the city. So that's something that is latent, that just because of these kind of new projects that are coming from these strong institutions like IIT, UIC, Grant Foundation, and so on, are starting to be activated. That's my feeling. And all of them are engaging students as a kind of like the body of development of these kind of new arguments and new possibilities. So I share your optimism. And of course, we can discuss particularities if we think that one project is better than the other, but in general, I think that the kind of the opportunities here and the student body is a super important role in those kind of agencies, because they are the ones that are basically creating the kind of the know-how with us, but also they're also like engaging the discussions very actively, and they're the ones that are basically like pushing us forward. So I mean, like that's why I think that the collective aspect that I was claiming at the beginning and the cultural kind of notion of architectural practice come together through those kind of venues.
Luis, what's been your experience with you've been here for 4 years at both Chicago. IIT has pushed the MCHAP agenda very strongly. What are your thoughts, likely you came to how could that contribute to the discourse in the city and beyond, do you think?
I mean, I think that those venues are super important. I can give you a counterexample if you want. Like, I mean, like, I was asked this year to write for the Mies Prize in Europe. It's in Barcelona, as you know, and that place. And I always, when I talk to the Mies Foundation, and they asked me, they were in Venice, and they were asking me, okay, what do you think about the role of the Mies Foundation and the prize and so on? And I thought, okay, it's super important, the prize, not so much only for the prize, but also because it engages or opens discussions through the kind of a global practice, but also it creates some sort of archive of recognition and know-how that we understand that is valuable and that we want to just preserve and disseminate as interesting. So it has this kind of dual role. One is much more proactive towards opening topics and discussing and know-how, and the other one is much more about archiving that possibility and engaging history, our disciplinary history with a particular kind of preservation, but also like respectful kind of attitude. That's one thing. So when I came here and I heard about the prize and the project and so on, I was super interested about that, because I thought that was like bringing the kind of the American particularities to that kind of agenda, which I think that are extremely out or downgraded at this moment. I mean, and there was not an existing platform of bringing the kind of the American survey into a different level that could be much more proactive and become like a cultural agency for discussing current venues. So in that sense, I think that it plays within that kind of optimistic understanding of Chicago a super important role, because it puts the architecture at the core of the city again, but from a global perspective, but within the kind of the American umbrella, which is a very particular kind of territory that has not been approached from any other institution.
Luis, so Vedran asked about culture, so I want to ask about nature. You, of course, it seems like this is another kind of agenda or another project that kind of spans a lot of your work. You show buildings that have the landscape coming into the building or over the top of the building. And then you showed an image like this and kind of rethinking the idea of the rural. Is this another kind of thread that goes through your practice? And do you see this, because of course we have a landscape program at IIT, and I'm curious where you see this maybe going.
Yeah, I think that also has to do with what was in my polytechnical kind of background. I mean, we have, when we graduated there, I mean, now it's changing, but I mean, when I was graduating, we're having like this kind of more holistic understanding of the architect that does architecture, urban design, and landscape without a single differentiation between them. So it was like 3 know-hows developed through a single degree. So from the very beginning of my education, I've been always exposed and involved into projects that were what we call now transdisciplinary kind of conditions. So that has, I think, an impact, maybe it's not still very rationalized, into the kind of the very straightforward kind of manipulation of all kind of matter and all kind of material organization to create architectural intensities. That's why also like we do like urban design as well and architecture, because I mean we come from a transdisciplinary kind of tradition where that kind of super kind of encapsulated know-how was not part of the game. And now that has become an opportunity for us to really like engage and expand the notions of type, or for example through these kind of tensions. Like when we're like doing that, we're expanding the problem of domesticity or the problem of the house through the notion of constructing a site, for example. And the other way around, we were basically challenging the notion of garden by making it architectonic through those kind of prefabricated pieces. So this idea that architecture is softening, or landscape is softening architecture, and architecture is like geometry, bringing geometry into the grid. I think it's something that is very explicit in some projects, but I mean, but it has not been like a super like explicit reclaim. It was a natural thing for us to do because we were trained in a kind of multidisciplinary context.
Thank you, Luis. With this, I would say we can close the
Thank you very
lecture.
much.
Thank you very much.